Well, hello everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your the Critique of the Week. It's the Critique of the Week. Welcome to the Critique of the Week. Another fun, exciting workshop experience we're going to have today. Looking poems over, talking about what works and what doesn't. It's that really great thing. We get to sit around and talk about poetry every Friday afternoon. Let's see, who do we have here? Let's see. M. Carr is here. Emily Arnold Fernandez. Terry Miller is here. D. Coleman. Winston Munn is here. Sarah Kahn. David 27. Let's see. MB. Yeah, it's more difficult with the handles nowadays, but I do like saying hi to everybody. Steve Horrell is here. Marianne Griffiths. Patty Arbor is here. Nancy Sabanek. Michael Ketchum. Christina Nueven. Patricia Kidd's here. Danette Bermia. Good to see you. Let's see. Holly York is here. Dick Westheimer, host of the community host of the community reading for the Prompt Lines, coming up this Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern time. This Sunday, find the Zoom link at rattle.com/page/prompts up there on the menu. Join in. Share your favorite prompt poem of the week, or the month, I should say. Dick Westheimer hosting it for us. Thanks so much, Dick. Kimberly Gibson-Tran is here. I should say, too, Lexi Pell is a Poet for Spawn and everything Rattle kind of veteran. She's been in Rattle a few times, been in Poet for Spawn many times too. She's going to be co-hosting. Dick's going to be pulling co-host in for the community reading every month, and Lexi's the first one, so definitely looking forward to that. Let's see. Hemant Malik is here, Poet of the Day today at Rattle.com with her Pushcart Prize nominated poem Shelf Life. So great to see you, Hemant. Brian O'Sullivan is here. Katie Dozier right over there through the doors, which I have to put a little blanket over so she can listen while I so it doesn't overlap. Let's see. All right. Well, let's get into our critiquing now. And how we're doing it now is if you have a poem in the queue, let me know in the chat window on YouTube especially. I'll peek over at Facebook too. But if you have a poem there and you're here right now, that's who we want to talk about your poems. And it's only if you submit. So if you go to rattle.com, find up in the menu bar the Critique of the Week is one of the options up in content. You can submit 2 poems there. Submit poems there. Come on to the Critique of the Week on YouTube or Facebook, and we will pull up your poems the week that you do. The first couple people who say that they have poems there will look at your poems. Over on Facebook, we got Donna Beth saying hi. Hey, Donna. Not as much action on Facebook as they used to have. Let's see. So Faye S. Rala has a couple poems in there. And Marianne Griffiths, too. We'll start there. First 2 people to say so. And let me know. Let's see. So Marianne Griffiths, obvious what your name is, but Faye SRALA 580. I'm sure that's not what you submitted under. So let me know. Let's type in Faye and see if what comes up there. Let's see. Critique of the Week. I got to do that too. And new. And search. Okay. Let's see if we have any. No. Let's see. Yeah, so whoever that was, let me know your... Yeah, the thing switching to handles really messes up the whole system. Yeah, so Fayes Rala. We'll start with Mary Ann Griffiths in that case. Oh, Faye Sorella. Oh, Faye Sorella. Okay. Faye Sorella. Let me try that. Hang on a second. We'll pull that up. New. Okay. There we go. Okay, thank you. Now we'll take a peek at these 2 poems first to start the shelf. So as always, leave as many comments as you can. We're going to talk about what works, what doesn't, just general poetry practice principles, line breaks, word choice, the rhythm and flow, the voice, all that kind of stuff. Any thoughts you have as you go, that's what's really valuable because we don't have the reader sitting next to us while we're writing poems. We only have ourselves. And so it's really a great thing to be able to see what other people are seeing and reacting to when they read their poems. Now, Faye Sorala is from Idaho and has 2 poems for us and a general question, too. I listened to the Poetry Space about political poems. You said that they are only effective if they bring something else into the discussion. And so does beautiful delinquents qualify? And how does this metaphor work in the other poem? So we'll take a look at those too. And yeah, I mean, the problem with political poems is poetry isn't really the stuff of politics. So politics is the stuff of, your political opinions sort of come from this left brain way of looking at the world that isn't the understated, complicated, complexifying way of poems see the world. And so it's difficult to write poems about politics and go somewhere surprising and interesting. And that's usually the problem with political poems. And it helps if you bring in some kind of angle. I think that's what we were talking about. If you look at the Poets Respond poems every Sunday for the last 15 years or however long we've been doing it, 10, 11, 12, I can't remember. If you look at those poems, they're usually the poet bringing some different angle, some different perspective, some memory, some personal anecdote, something else beyond just talking about the news or the politics itself. And that's what makes a poem really work. And that way you can get under people's defensive systems and actually affect them and have their opinions change. It's really hard to change a political opinion. And that's really the problem with political poems, is it's sort of, rooting for your own team and saying, aren't we on the good team? And everybody who's on the team says, yeah, but it really doesn't do anything unless, getting underneath the surface, having people think in a different way is really the power of poetry. And that's what we can try to do with our political poems by using the tools of storytelling that build empathy and make us connect and see the world through other people's eyes, which is what poetry is special at. So anyway, let's take a look at the first poem here. This is Beautiful Delinquents. And again, the poet is Faye Sarala. Beautiful Delinquents. Fog lied close to the ground, covering the last night's misbehaving. Whiskey bottles, roaches, a few mollies forgotten in the fever of young irresponsibility. Bodies strewn across an expanse of grass like an artist's rendering of a battlefield. The evening music bloomed out of a pickup stereo, so loud my heart changed its beat to match the rhythm. A deer made an appearance at the edge of the trees, then said no way to the chaos that reigned. We were having the time of our lives, if an unforgettable experience included being plastered in the forest. I'm glad I hung out with these guys. They knew right from wrong and told the truth, even while out of their minds on LSD. And when a person smiled and said, "That's fine, dude, I'm not mad at you," they smiled and said, "I'm not mad at you back." So there you go. So that's really interesting. The reference is pretty subtle, and I wonder if it's to Renee Good in her last words on video there, where she says, "That's fine, dude, I'm not mad at you." I wonder if that's going to be something that we remember in the future. If it were within the Poets Respond criterion, we would think it would be like within the context, you'd have a little note that says it. But 6 months from now, will we realize that reference or not? And it might be worth it having a little epigraph up there saying, pointing us in that direction, because we might not pick up on that otherwise. But it definitely, this takes the political at a slant, which is, Emily Dickinson said, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant," right? That was Dickinson. And that's what this does. And that's what political poems should do, to function as art instead of propaganda, which is what, in my opinion, the opposite of art is. And I think this does it. It takes this angle, talking about something different, and then going here. So the title is Beautiful Delinquents. Let me see what everybody's saying about it, and then we'll look at it a little more closely. And I gotta read my windows a little bit. Okay. Yeah. Terry Miller says Patricia Smith is famous for what Tim just read. Yeah, but Patricia Smith is a master at that, definitely. I mean, her book, the book of poems on Katrina. What's that name called? I can't remember the title of that book. But then her slam poems are just so great at that too. Yeah. Let's see. And Christina Waven says, "I like the so loud my heart changed its beat to match the rhythm." And Sarah Kent says, "I like that we know where we are in the poem." And Petty Arbor says, "I think the ending works without the specific reference." That's interesting too, because I thought I thought the reference, I think it was sort of necessary to get to that topic. And Ryan McCarty says, if an unforgettable experience included being plastered in the forest made me smile, a nice little de-romanticizing of the shifting of the moment. Yeah, I think that was my favorite moment in the poem, too. Yeah. Okay. And Sean Evaningo Sanders says maybe the title could do some heavy lifting to put those ending lines into context. Yeah. Yeah, right. Okay. And Kimberly Gibson Tran points out the past of lie is lay, so probably should be fog, lay close to the ground. Yeah, that's when I have to look that up every time too. It gets a little tricky because of the past tense being the present tense of the two different verbs that actually is. Anyway, let's read the poem a little more closely. So, and I think it should be lay too. Yeah, fog lay close to the ground, covering the last night's misbehaving. I like that as an opening, and the beautiful linguist kind of sets the scene a little bit too. A tiny note, but Terry Miller says get rid of the in line 2. I agree. I think it's better. So we already edited some. The fog lay close to the ground, covering last night's misbehaving. Whiskey bottles, roaches, a few mollies. One of the things, and maybe I'm just like old, would you call mollies, would you refer to it as just mollies? It seems a little not the way you talk about mollies, but maybe. Like pills or something. But anyway, a few mollies forgotten in the fever of young irresponsibility. Bodies strewn across an expanse of grass like an artist's rendering of a battlefield. So far, there's a really nice setting the stage where we know where we are, as people said. Yeah. The evening's music boomed out of a pickup stereo so loud, my heart changed its beat to match the rhythm. So there's one thing here. So the fog lay on the ground. It's last night's misbehaving. So there's a time shift that's a little bit hard to follow. So the evening's music, because we're set, even though it's storytelling in the past tense, there's like a past that's beyond the past because it's last night's misbehaving, and then we go to last night without really a shift there. Yeah. So as Michael or Michelle Kimball says, is it still the evening's music? Yeah. Yeah. And then Deborah Katai said you could get rid of the like, just an artist's rendering of a battlefield. I agree with that too. I almost mentioned that. Bodies strewn across an expanse of grass, an artist's rendering of a battlefield. The evening's music boomed out of a, because we're talking about last night again, so this is a little bit, it's a little bit like disorienting. The evening's music boomed out of a pickup stereo so loud my heart changed its beat to match the rhythm. A deer made an appearance at the edge of the trees, then said no way to the chaos that reigned. I think chaos reigning is a bit of a cliche. It's just a phrase that's used a lot. If you hear the chaos, you automatically go to it's going to be raining. And so that's something to try to find a different, more interesting way to say it right there. We were having the time of our lives. If an unforgettable experience included being plastered in the forest. And I think that I like that reference or way of describing it. Yeah. Anyway, I'm glad I hung out with these guys. They knew right from wrong and told the truth, even while out of their minds on LSD. And when a person smiled and said, "That's fine, dude, I'm not mad at you," they smiled and said, "I'm not mad at you back." Yeah, Mary King also points out time of our lives is cliche too. Yeah, and I think to me, I think it doesn't dig into what we really want to talk about. Yeah, mollies are MDMA. I'm trying to remember. I mean, it's a tiny point. But I like pluralizing and nounifying it or something. I whenever it was referred to back in the days where I was around people doing, it would be like a few hits of Molly or a few something of Molly. I can't remember, but I never heard it like just Molly's. But maybe that's just me, and I'm that was like the 90s or whatever. I agree that the deer line could be improved. This is Michelle Kimberly. Agree the deer line can be improved by describing the action of the deer. Show don't tell. Yeah, I feel like the poem is sort of hasn't really figured out. Like it set a scene. There's sort of a comparison going on, but it hasn't like dug into that enough. There's the tabs of LSD. Yeah. Anyway, but it feels like it's sort of it has this connection. Like we're making this connection to the delinquents, being in a field, like having fun, that LSD, and then that to the political situation with the quote. Yeah, Monica Doa says the ending falls a bit short. Yeah. Ritz Battaglini says title doesn't match what's in the poem. Yeah. I think it just doesn't push far enough into... Yeah, Mary Keating says, is this all we're referring to Renee Good? And I think so. Yeah, Kimberly Gibson Tran says what the poem needs maybe is a sort of revelation. Like, I think it's just not... It's sort of presented the scene, and we've shown kind of... We're going to compare this scene to the political situation with Renee Good, but then it doesn't explore that. It doesn't dig in and elaborate on how those two things are related. So it kind of paints a scene that and there's a reference there, and the connection between the two is tenuous, I guess. And I think it's just not developed. Because I couldn't even sort of nod toward what the comparison is. I mean, it's something that you would say, that these people would say, and there's something she said. But I think, I don't know, it needs more exploration in this direction. Sarah Khan says, the ending can give a little more insight into why they are doing drugs or something that feels satisfying enough to chew on long after the poem is being read. Yeah. Winston Munn, there's a change of voice, but it isn't because the original voice has changed its mind. Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's just a poem that's not developed yet. And I assume this was submitted. I mean, obviously, it had to be submitted really recently. Yeah. Yeah. And Jamie Thomas says they definitely avoided the standard political poem trap, though. Definitely. Yeah. It feels like it's missing the sort of the commentary just on why these two things are related. Nancy Spanik says they knew right from wrong. How so? Yeah. And so Michael Ketchum says the connection between the two is a stretch. And that's really it. So it paints a picture. We're there with it. We're experiencing the situation that the imagination is conjuring. And then we have this reference to a political event. And it's just explore how those two things are related. It's a poem that's just not developed yet. I think that's really, I'll say, except the small things. There are a couple cliches in there, a couple articles that we don't need. But we need some deeper, and maybe what I would do is sort of trim back, because we do have this problem with the, where it's last night's misbehaving, then we go back to last night too suddenly. So figure out where we are in time while being told this story. And I think it's nice to have it be last night's. I like this image of the fog close to the ground covering last night's misbehaving. Great start in the description of what's there, and then go into the Renee Good thing, or maybe you could have somebody who, like a memory and clear that you're going back. Oh, last night someone said this and it reminded me of this, and then dig into how these two situations are related. And I think that's, yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, let's move on to the other poem. We'll see what we've got. Oops, hang on. We need to refresh sometimes. Sometimes Submittable doesn't like to just push next poem. Let's see. Here we go. This is Homeless. Again, this is Faye Sarala from Idaho, and the poem is Homeless. Snowflakes scatter on currents of frozen air. Water droplets cling to each other, create lovely sculptures. Their silhouette determined by temperature and moisture, like tears restrained by frosty conditions. They lay in wooded areas, parks, and are swept under bridges, piled as a group, responsible for slush on sidewalks but add variety to the seasons. Each one is unique and symmetrical, unless broken by life's hard turns. And look, even the ones no longer whole are still beautiful. So interesting, I'd say. This line here, a lot of times there's really great lines that are very simple in poems and direct. And this is one of those cases where it's a good line, and this is the kind of thing that was missing from the last poem, I'd say. If we had, even if we like jam these poems together in some kind of like mashup, imagine if we go back, and when a person smiled and said, "That's fine, dude, I'm not mad at you," they smiled, and I said, "I'm not mad at you back." And look, even the ones no longer whole are still beautiful. Like if we have, Kimberly Gibson Tran says, the end, and look, the turn is a nice move. That's the thing that's missing from the first poem, So as far as like a structural thing, like that's where we sort of felt like we didn't go anywhere. And it's because it was missing that kind of like, how do these two connect? Like what connection do I see between these two? What am I exploring when I write this poem? And okay, so homeless is the title. Let's read it again. Homeless. Snowflakes scatter on currents of frozen air. Water droplets cling to each other, create lovely sculptures. So I think there's a little bit, whereas the last poem had specific and unusually described details, this is a little bit, it's not like cliche, but it's like a poet's description of things that you kind of see all the time. And I think it could be a little more condensed. So, snowflakes scatter on currents of frozen air. That's fine. I think just like creating lovely sculptures or something and skipping the water droplets, like it's a little bit too much. Their silhouette determined by temperature and moisture, like tears restrained by frosty conditions. Yeah, so Ryan McCarty says this is a better explanation for what I have trouble with here. He says, I like everything about this poem's story. That turn at the end is hot. The adjectives could use a bit of pizzazz, maybe. And that's the thing. They're sort of just generic descriptions of things instead of really like bringing it to life. So I think working on not relying on adjectives as much. Tears restrained by frosty conditions. It's just not that evocative. But if we describe it more deeply and concisely, then I think the poem would really work because it is an interesting, plot kind of arrangement that the poem has going on. They lay in wooded areas, parks, and are swept under bridges, piled as a group, responsible for slush on sidewalks, and add variety to the seasons. Each one is unique and symmetrical unless broken by life's hard turns. And look, even the ones no longer whole are still beautiful. And that's a really great line there. I really like that. Yeah, and Winston Munn says the descriptions are a little drab, but the last line is great. There is something kind of, I don't know, it's a delicate topic, just comparing, but it's interesting, an interesting metaphor, and especially if you go a little deeper in it with the way, like they have that, what's that stuff called where it's like intentionally annoying seats and things so no one sleeps there. There's a way that like we don't want snow on benches and we act that way, and there's a way that we discourage the homeless, and so there's a really interesting parallel there with how it's like this unwanted stuff that you don't really want to pay attention to, or at least that's the sort of the state's answer to it. Hostile architecture, that's the word. Thanks Jamie. There's that in the comparison too. That's pretty interesting. And the idea of just sweeping it aside, and brushing it away, hoping it melts and disappears, and you don't have to deal with it. So I think, I think one of the things I would maybe take a look at for this is looking at those really concise poets, because I think there could be a lot of concision in this poem. And Mike White, Wendy Vitalock, Andrea Cohen, those poems that really cram a lot into a tiny space, because I think you could do that here. The snowflakes scatter on currents of frozen air, water droplets cling to each other to create lovely sculptures. Their silhouettes determined by temperature and moisture like tears restrained by frosty conditions. that whole chunk right here, which is half the poem, doesn't really have a lot going on. You could just say snowflakes scatter on currents of air. They lay in wooded areas, parks, and are swept under bridges, piled up as a group. Like, what's lost if we skipped all this? And so making it an even more concise poem makes it more powerful. Yeah. And as yes, Genevieve says the title is setting up the extended metaphor. It's one of those poems that, without the title, you don't know what the extended metaphor actually is. Yeah. And then, yeah. Michelle Kimball says, I would watch the use of ones when referring to people could be taken as condescending. Yeah, the interesting or the difficult thing here, too, is we're talking about the way, society is condescending to homeless people and to not feel, because I'm sure the poem was written out of a place of empathy and caring and not wanting it to be that way. And I think you have to be careful about like using that language and then feeling a little icky over it, which is what I think Michelle Kimball was saying. Yeah. Let me read another poem. I love this poem from Rattle. It's what is the poem? Who is the poet? Drawing a blank here. Let's see. It's I know the guy very well. I can see his face. He taught at Binghamton College. Elizabeth Arches is the place. Why can't I remember his name? Elizabeth Arches. Because he should send us more poems. Joe Whale, yeah. I don't know why Joe never sent more poems than just this one. But this is Joe's poem, Morning at the Elizabeth Arch. And feel how this poem, it's talking about a similar thing, but really condenses the language and really uses metaphor, pushing it as far as like the language will take it. Okay. This is Morning at the Elizabeth Arch by Joe Whale. It's from like issue, 27 or something. The winos rise as beautiful as deer. Look how they stagger from their sleep as if the morning were a river against which they contend. This is not a sentiment filled with the disdain of human pity. They turn in the mind. They turn beyond the human order. One scratches his head and yawns. Another rakes a hand through slick mats of thinning hair. They blink and the street litter moves its slow liturgical way. A third falls back, bracing himself on an arm. At river's edge, the deer stand poised. One breaks the spell of his reflection with a hoof and, struggling, begins to cross. Yeah, so that's Joe Whale's poem, Morning at the Elizabeth Arch. Similar sort of topic, and, obviously similar topic. But see how, we set up the extended metaphor. The winos rise as beautiful as deer. And we stay with really crisp, sharp language the whole time. And that's what really sells the poem and makes it work. And going back to this poem here, Homeless, I think that the structure of the poem works really well, but it just needs that sort of intensity. And I think condensing it down and coming up with individual sort of metaphors and that kind of language as you're describing the snow is what's going to make the poem really take off. Because I really love that everybody loves that turn at the end. I think it's great. So it's just a matter of describing the snowflakes with that same kind of sort of lyric intensity, if that makes sense. And that's where the revision should go. And again, we pointed out, it's mostly the reliance on adjectives, which just aren't as strong as using metaphor and concrete noun to build the images and the scene. Let's see. Let me look at the any other comments. I think we can move on, though. Yeah. Dry Montito says, poets are tempted to use adjectives to discriminate between the beautiful and mundane, but that's usually redundant. Useful adjectives show how the thing's beauty is different from other kinds of beauty. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so Dick Westheimer says, this one exercise I try to do is copy my poem to another doc and see if I can remove 1/3 of it and see if it still moves in a way that is enchanting to me. That's a good one, yeah. Okay. Okay, well, let's move on. Well, thanks for sharing these two. Definitely poems that have a lot of interesting substance, a lot of meat on the bones. So thanks for sharing these two poems, Faye. And hope that all the commentary was helpful. Because I think both of them are definitely poems that are worth developing more and just need a little bit more developing in different ways, too, which is interesting. Which sort of shows that, you can do both things you need to do. Because I think the one thing one poem lacks sort of what the other poem lacks. And there's sort of, or the opposite of what the other poem lacks. So it's just a matter of like getting it all together in one poem, I guess I'd say. Okay, let's move on. Thanks for sharing those. And the other poet who had poems here was, let me scroll up and find it. Let's see, where was that? A good poem. Mary Lisa's. Oh, hi, Mary Lisa's here. I'm trying to find. Let's see, I submitted 2 poems a week. Sorry. Oh, Mary Ann Griffiths. That's where we're going. That was the second person to say anything. Mary Ann Griffiths got 2 poems for us, too. Let me label this, and then we'll go to Mary Ann Griffiths. Okay. So there are 2 poems here from Mary Ann from Ontario, Canada. And some general stuff. She says, really enjoying the critique of the week. It's a great way to learn what works in poems and how to manifest it for what we cannot fathom. I worry if it's too abstract and if the reader can grasp the poem in the manner of understanding or emotional depth. I'm also fretting about enjambment and line breaks with this piece. And then for the other one, I'm not sure about the title, so think about that title. Is it too cheesy? Yet I feel intensely about the subject and felt the formal sounding title gifted it gravitas. Okay. This doesn't follow a definitive pattern with stanza line counts. I wonder what stanzas work. Okay. Well, here we go. These are 2 again by Mary Ann Griffiths. Here we go. What we cannot fathom. If only water would keep still, it would become one with sky. Language would forget the word horizon, after this union. Water tears itself into shreds of foam and power as sky mourns. Her tears fall from storms giving back to water what it had given up. Halcyon days are just that, a few moments of calm before the wind provokes what lies beneath to rise and ride the waves, churning up grievances we drowned. In the blue expanse of this morning, I stand planted in the sand. The water is young, its smooth skin remembering how your laughter traveled over the surface through mist. Intimate, close and translated into our own private story. Well, this is interesting. I like the rhythm of it. Let's see. Yeah. But I feel a little like I'm not sure where we're situated. Yep. As Kimberly Gibson Tran says, an undefined you. Yeah. And again, the issue with the you is that it's just, there's so many options for who the you can be. And this is one of those poems where Deborah Katai says, I like undefined yous. Show me a poem if you can. If you think that you really like an undefined you, where the poem really works. And I think my suspicion is that it's not really undefined. But yeah, you just get lost, as Sarah Khan is saying, in where we are and what's going on in the poem. It's one of those where we're sort of floating in a kind of limbo where we don't really know what to touch, Leslie Ann Skeggerton has lost where we are. Like, we're not really situated within time and place and speaker, and that makes the poem not really connect. So having a more of a setup, whether who, what, why, where, when, where we get some kind of touchstone, just some kind of anchor that you can hold on to and know where you are as a reader, will let us connect more with the poem. But let's reread it as Sarah Khan suggests. What we cannot fathom. If only the water would keep still, it would become one with sky. Language would forget the word horizon after this union. So we start out with this like conditional statement, the if only this would happen. And it's a little bit hard to follow. We don't know who's sort of making that statement and what our position is, what the speaker's position is. If only the water would keep still, it would become one with the sky. And we also have a situation where the only punctuation, I believe, in the poem, there's a comma here, but mostly commas are missing where they're asked for. And I think that makes it a little bit trippy to read. If you're going to have a poem that doesn't use much punctuation, relies on line break and rhythm to stand in for punctuation for you, I would advise to do it consistently through the whole poem and just have no punctuation. But mostly I would recommend just having regular punctuation. So then you don't have to trip over each line break wondering if you're supposed to pause or not, or if there should be a comma there. And so, does sky language, is that one word? You think that for a moment. It would become one with sky. Language would forget the word. It becomes hard to read. But if we have a comma after sky, it would become one with sky. Language would forget. Then we know how we're supposed to read that sentence. That's what grammar, or that's what punctuation is for. And I would put that back and not assume that we're going to follow you based on the line break. So that's one small thing, but it happens throughout the poem. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned that. But the abstraction at the top is what makes it hard to connect with. But we'll keep going. Water tears itself into shreds of foam and power as sky mourns. Her tears fall from storms, giving back water to what it had given up. Dick Westheimer says, I think the opening could be a good metaphor if we knew from the beginning the specifics of a relationship, so we know who is water and who is sky. That's a good way to put it, yeah. Her tears fall from storms, giving back to water what it had given up. And even that is a little bit, the abstraction makes it sort of inaccurate too, I guess, or just technically, like, how could it be true? Her tears fall from storms, giving back to water what it had given up. So she's like giving, the water is giving water back to itself in that construction. And so, I guess maybe if it's raining on the ocean, sorry about that. I have this like lingering cold we've had for a while here. Anyway, I'm still trying to say, I don't miss, if Deborah, you have a poem, a you poem in the second person that you really like a lot, where it has an ambiguous you, I'd love to see an example if you want to put it in. But just to abstract the picture is the main thing. Doug Van Hooser says this is a story about two people. And Sean and Viningo Center says, what is the what referenced in the title? So we'll keep going though. Halcyon days are just that, a few moments of calm before the wind provokes what lies beneath to rise and ride the waves, churning up grievances we drowned. So do you notice that the rhythm is really nice though? There's a real sense, an ear for the music of poetry in this. Where the lack of punctuation occasionally does trip you up, it feels there's a nice rhythm and a cadence to it. In the blue expanse of this morning, I stand planted in the sand. So this is the first time, I believe, we have a her, which I guess is the sky, but then suddenly we have an I stand planted in the sand. The water is young, its smooth skin, remembering how your laughter. So all of a sudden we get this I in the you. Traveled over the surface through mist intimate, close, and translated into our own private story. Yeah. Winston Munn says a straightforward title could help a lot. Bill is water, Jane is sky. Yeah, I mean, what if we did that? Bill is water, Jane is sky. If only the water would keep still, it would become one with sky. So all of a sudden, if we just had that, Bill is water, Jane as sky, and then then we can plug in and know the metaphor. In the same way the homeless for the snowflake work too, and then suddenly you connect, even though you have no idea who Bill and Jane are. Already you're connecting, and you don't know the kind of situation that's going on, and then you can start to actually appreciate what we're talking about. So it's a great example of just how simple that does. Yeah. I'm curious. Let's look at Wild Geese and see why that's not a problem by Mary Oliver. That's Michelle Kimball's suggestion for a U poem that works fine. And we'll let me try to. I'm really surprised the Poetry Foundation doesn't have that. We got to go to allpoetry.com, courtesy of them, which is a dubious website. But anyway, they have some poems you need sometimes. Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. So I think right away, this is not the kind of U poem where it's ambiguous, because it's and actually, if you listen to the Poetry Space, the episode on titles, which dropped just now, I can't remember what he called it, but our guest was the wonderful Dante DiStefano, Dante DiStefano, who talked about titles, and one of the title examples he had was this like declarative. I can't remember what he called it, but it's when you're saying something like you must do this. And that makes the you immediately the reader. Like it's a direct address. You do not have to be good. And we could say Mary Oliver was really talking to herself at the same time, but it's the positioning of the voice is what we're talking about when we talk about the ambiguity of the second person. And Wild Geese, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through a desert repenting. She's talking to us. Like that, the declarative nature of that sentence. The imperative. Thanks, Sean. I'm terrible with the labels of grammar. Yeah, the imperative nature of that sentence tells you that it's you. We don't have to wonder who the you is. She's talking to us. She said we don't have to be good. Whoever's reading this, you do not have to be good, and we know that immediately with that first sentence because it's the stance of the speaker that lets us know what the you means. And I would conjecture, and I think it's just something that people don't really a lot of times realize what's actually going on and how the poem is functioning, where they think that the you is ambiguous maybe and it's not, or don't realize that the you is ambiguous because they assume that we know. And there's layers of understanding there, and so a poem that works with a you identifies itself right away, if not like overtly, just in the posture of itself. And that's what you have to do if you're going to be writing in that second person. And so this is a great example of it. You do not have to be, I'll read the whole poem. It's short and it's great. Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clear blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Yeah. Yeah, so Kimberly Gibson Tran says, yes, a big difference in tone with the imperative. I'd rather be given commands than be described as doing something I'm not doing. Question, would this poem work as well if the you had been we instead? I don't think so. I think we do have, and I think the issue is we have an ear for listening to authority because we all have parents. We all grew up with someone, and even if we didn't have like a father in our lives, we fill in the gap, because we're kind of programmed for that. And we have this like attention that's we're willing to give to an authority, and then sometimes we resist that and push it away, and it's like feels negative to hear that, and it becomes complicated, like everything does. But I think we're drawn to that voice. If you look at a poet, Joseph Fasano, right now is publishing a lot of very public poems, a lot of very poems that are and he uses this direct address, this imperative, so often to connect with people. And I think that's why his poems are successful. And to do that, though, to tell somebody, to sit down and say, I don't know who's going to be reading this, but I'm going to tell that person something they need to know. There's sort of like an arrogance to that you have to have and be willing to accept. You have to accept your position of authority to be able to speak in sentences like this because once you start sort of equivocating on your position of authority, the voice falls apart and doesn't work anymore. So you need to have a sort of confidence in your voice to use this type of imperative. And I think we connect with it and it resonates when we do it, but we have to do it consistently, and you have to have the confidence to enter that position and say, I know the best for you. You do not have to be good. And I think that's a really important thing. And I think where poems, a lot of times the ones that are direct addresses, they fall short because they don't have the consistent confidence in the voice that I have the right to tell you what you should be doing. But if you look at it, it's interesting. And I don't know why, Joseph Fasano's poems just pop up on my Facebook feed all the time. And I just think of that because it's a great example of that, of having confidence and then how much that translates for people enjoying, appreciating the sentiment. And that's what Mary Oliver does here and some other poems too. Shenevini Sanders says, by using you, the poem becomes a gentle affirmation for those who feel like they don't belong or fit in, especially the LGBTQ community when it was written. Such an important poem. Yeah. And it is. I mean, because poems live too on such an intimate level. Like there's a big part of poems. Even, we had Billy Collins as the guest this week on the Rattlecast. And what he does is sort of bring you into his kitchen and sort of whisper his daydreams into your ear. And there's this real intimacy to it. It's like he's personally speaking to me. And when you have this Mary Oliver speaking to you, she's speaking with such authority, but also like a gentle intimacy at the same time. And so you're like, I do need to listen to this advice. Like she, and I think that's why a lot of her poems work. And there's a lot of examples of that. But you have to, but it's always establishing that voice when it's the you, when it's that direct address to the reader. It's establishing and being consistent with it that makes the poem work. Anyway, that's a nice maybe side anecdote, but a long one. Let's see. So let's go back to this poem. We were talking about we cannot fathom, and yes. So here, the you it doesn't have that sense. It's not speaking. We don't know who that you is that appears at the very end. All is very ambiguous. Just be helped by knowing the situation and what we're representing. I think the best comment on this poem was that whoever it was that said, Bill is water, Mary is sky, or whatever that was. A title like that lets us know what the metaphor is going to be, even if we don't know the people, would really help bring this to life. And then use specific details and tell the story that way. Let's take a look at the next poem, though. This one is Elegy for a Bee. And remember, the question was about, does the title work? And I like the title without reading the poem, Elegy for a Bee. It makes me curious. And it does, I think, what the poet said is that the formality of it imbued it with a sort of a certain posture. I think that works. Elegy for a Bee. Something synthetic inhabits the wind, white powdered rain falls. Crop dusters spew clouds of chalky blankets, smothering his wings, no match for the plane, cutting the sky in half, spilling a white death. White is the color of morning, silence humming, stillness of the hive. When I pick you up, you are curled, almost introspective, a fury, intricate miracle. A furry? Yeah, I guess a furry, intricate miracle of flight in my palm. This is nothing I can do. There is nothing I can do but hold you, weightless compared to the burden you carried, the load of love for your kin, your vow to the earth, keystone in the arch of creation. Nothing is solitary. He travels now, integrates his death into life, becomes the pulse of a heart, the lingering kiss on the wildflower. So this is really interesting because this is one of those examples. We do two poems to see if it's a pattern, it's like a habit, or just like a one-off thing, and you can really easily adjust. Either way, it's really important to know. And I think this poem has the exact same problems as the other poem, whereas the first poems we looked at, they sort of had the opposite problems, so you could see them sort of melding together really easily. This is sort of an easier thing where you can just work on these two things. First of all, like I said, not having the punctuation where the line breaks end, like having the line break stand in for a comma makes it really difficult to read the poem. Enjambment should be where you don't need punctuation. If you're going to have a punctuationless poem that can work, read that whole sort of second half of Merwin's life where he was writing without punctuation, or maybe like a little section in there at least. And you can start to sort of work with punctuationless poems, but the blending of the two is just creating more confusion to the reading. And you have a really natural rhythm and sense of music, which is sort of being held back by tripping over the inconsistencies of the punctuation. So if there's should be a comma, keep the comma. Don't crop that. And then the other thing too is there's too much distance again. In the you, again, it's another you poem where we don't know really who the you is. Are you talking to me? Are you talking to somebody else and we're overhearing you telling somebody else something? Are you talking to yourself? And we get the when I pick you up, so we know that. But we don't know who the you is. And we don't even know like what category to place the you in. And that makes the whole poem feel disconnected. It's not like the Mary Oliver poem where we know exactly, oh, you're talking to me. Okay, I'm listening, which is what you do when you hear that first line from Mary Oliver. We don't get that. And so we end up saying like who are we talking about? And what's going on here? Like the rhythm and the sort of poetic imagination are working well in the poem, but it's not connected. It's too disconnected from, the sign is too far removed from the signified to go in like a philosophical way. There's too much gap between what you're really talking about in the images and things you're presenting, so we can't really connect with it. We need just a better sense of our position within the imaginative field of the poem so that we know what we're talking about, and then we can relate on that level and appreciate it. And so it's like and that was what was missing from the first poem too. So those two things, it's just more ties to what you're really talking about, even if it's just the title. Like I think it was Winston Munn who said, just it's the title explaining what's going on and what the extended metaphor is going to be, or touching back into it and letting us know who you're talking about at regular intervals. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, D. Coleman says too much telling in the first stanza. Let's read the poem again. We only read it once, and we'll maybe look at a little more detail. Elegy for a Bee. I still like the title, and it does. If we refer to the bee a little bit more regularly or something, or directly, it might work. But we just lose the thread, I think, when I pick you up. Let's see. Something synthetic inhabits the wind, and then we need a comma there. White powdered rain falls. Crop dusters spew clouds of chalky blankets, smothering his wings, no match for the plane. Yeah, and I guess maybe that's a problem too, and I think someone pointed this out. That's what they were talking about. We have the his, and then we have the you, and I guess maybe that's what's confusing too, is that it shifts from the third person. I think when I pick you up as the bee, but also his wings are the bee's wings. So this should be like your, if you're going to be, and then you could say elegy to a bee. So see how much difference is elegy to a bee. Something synthetic inhabits the wind. White powdered rain falls. Crop dusters spew clouds of chalky blankets, smothering your wings. No match, and we need a comma there again. No match for the plane, cutting the sky in half, spilling a white death. White is the color of morning, comma. Silence humming, comma. Stillness of the hive. When I pick you up, you are curled, almost introspective, a furry, intricate miracle of flight in my palm. See, I really like that one. Even though it's a stupid thing for me, confusing fury and furry, but it's one of those words that I always, and maybe it's not just me. I'm always like, which word is that? Anyway, almost introspective. But anyway, I like this. When I pick you up, and I guess this is a good example of what to do in poems, because there's a real directness to when I pick you up. And imagine if it's just elegy for a bee. When I pick you up, you are curled, almost introspective, a furry, intricate miracle of flight in my palm. I mean, if you really want to keep us grounded, just start with this stanza, because this is what we mean by like being grounded and knowing where we are. Yeah. Oh, and I think Mary Keating beat me to it. Yeah. She says maybe start with a third stanza. I wasn't even looking at the comments. Yeah. This is what we mean when we say like be direct and let us know the situation. It's writing like this where we know, this is an elegy for a bee. I pick you up, you are curled, almost introspective, a furry, intricate miracle of flight in my palm. That's a really nice description of that. There's nothing I can do but hold you weightless compared to the burden you carried, the load of love for your skin, your vow to the earth, keystone in the arch of creation. And so there's a nice description there. Maybe what I would do, elegy for a bee beneath the crop dusting cloud. And then you can cut all of this up, that we know the situation, and we just jump in here. So elegy for a bee beneath the crop dusting cloud. When I pick you up, you are curled, almost introspective, a furry, intricate miracle of flight in my palm. There is nothing I can do but hold you, weightless, compared to the burden you carried, the load of love for your kin, your vow to the earth, keystone in the arch of creation. Really nice descriptions there. Nothing is solitary. He travels now, integrates his death into life, becomes the pulse of a heart, the lingering kiss on the wildflower. So here I'm not sure. So nothing is solitary. That works. I think we need, going somewhere. Nothing is solitary. And maybe like, what does this make you think of? Like maybe, does this remind you of something in your own life, a memory? Like where can you go? Where else can you go? The poem sort of, it has a nice setup if we start here especially. What does that relate to, and how much further can we push that? And I think the nothing is solitary, my mother lived alone at 85 and blah, 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 or something. Like go into some place else and see what you can do, Kimberly Gibson Tran says, all we need from the final stanza is the last line and its image. So, well, I think maybe. So who is the he? Did we shift? That's my confusion about the end. Is because the bee was you, or is the he the person flying with a crop duster plane? Sean Evaningo Center says, distill the stanza down to you or the lingering kiss on the wildflower. Yeah, that's a really nice line at the end. But it feels like there's, in this spot where we have, he travels now, integrates his death, blah, blah. That's a description that's very telly, and it's like a gap. Nothing is solitary. 2 stanzas of like going somewhere different, then coming back to the you or lingering kiss on the wildflower. And that's where, that's where the poem, it needs more right there. Some leap, is Winston Munn saying. All right, well, I think that's probably going to wrap it up. And hopefully this was helpful. All right, I think this is going to wrap it up. So thanks for sharing these. Hopefully the advice was helpful. In both poems, a lot of good content. I mean, there's a lot to work with on all 4 of these poems we looked at today. So thanks so much for sharing them. And so I should remind everybody, the Poetry Space is out, the second half of our titles episode. Check that out. Also, Billy Collins was the guest in the Rattlecast last week. Really fun episode there. There's a whole big changes we're doing to the Rattlecast 2, where it's the invited prompt lines in the second half. So submit your poems for the prompt by Sunday night. Katie's going to email maybe like 10 people or so. There's no fixed number depending on how long the poems are. We're going to try to fit in that space and make it a kind of highlights from the prompt lines and have a lot more diversity, bring in new faces every week, some old faces. We're going to try to mix that up. Katie's doing a great job of that, even though it is a lot more work. So thanks to her for doing that. And it's going to make the prompt lines sort of more vibrant, I think. And it's always fun. And then we're also having on Sunday night, once again, the community prompt lines reading hosted by Dick Westheimer. Co-host this week, Lexi Pell. They're going to be sharing and hosting a Zoom, just private, no pressure. You can hang out, share each other's work, discuss in the chat windows there, have a lot of fun. That's going to be this Sunday over Zoom at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Go to rattle.com, find the prompt lines page, or the Rattle prompts page on Facebook. Find the Zoom link there and join in for that. Okay, anyway, that's a lot of rambling. Now, this week's guest coming up, and I should put this mood back on. This week's guest coming up on the Rattlecast is going to be Liz Robbins. Liz Robbins is the second winner that we've released so far from last year's Rattle Chapbook Prize manuscripts, Backlit. And that was a book about exploring the lives through interviews and other things of sex workers. So a really fascinating book, a lot more sort of journalism involved in that book than most of the books we publish. A really interesting book there. That's Liz Robbins. She's also going to have poems from her most recent full-length book as well. So we're going to sort of half and half that show. It should be a lot of fun. And the prompt for this week, and once again, submit your prompts by Monday night, for your poems by Sunday night to have them considered for the prompt lines invitations. But the prompt for this week is to write a poem about a time something was put somewhere that it didn't belong, including an unusual detail about the person that found it. So that's going to be the prompt for this week. Remember to submit them by Sunday night in the new format, and you will get an invite probably Monday afternoon to join if you can. There's a little box now. Check if you think, if you plan on making it, if you're invited, check that box to say, yes, you want to be invited, and then you will possibly be invited if you're one of the poems chosen. Always you're submitting, though, for the prompt poet of the month. So get any of your poems in by then to be considered for that. And even if you're not invited on, it might be you may still get the prompt poet of the month. You never know, because a lot of things. This is really about variety and mixing things up and keeping the open lines, the prompt lines, feeling fresh during the Rattlecast. Anyway. A lot of stuff going on as always. Rattlecast number 327 is up next, Monday, January 26th, regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Goodbye.